Marcus Henderson's berry farm was 3 months behind on payments when he spotted the elegant couple walking past his weathered fence line. His calloused hands trembled as he gathered the last perfect strawberries of the season, knowing each one represented another day he might keep his land. What he didn't know was that this simple act of kindness would transform his crumbling farm into the most sought-after supplier in the culinary world. He didn't know the woman admiring his berries was Isabella Rodriguez, the James Beard Award winner whose restaurants commanded 3-month waiting lists. He didn't know her companion was James Chen, the celebrity chef whose cookbook had topped bestseller lists for 47 weeks straight. All Marcus knew was that sharing felt right, but as he handed over that basket of berries, one question would soon define everything. Could a struggling farmer's generosity unlock a partnership that would save not just his farm, but revolutionize fine dining forever? Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The morning sun cast long shadows across Marcus Henderson's strawberry fields, highlighting the contrast between the lush green rows and the peeling paint on his farmhouse. 27 years he'd worked this land, following in his father's footsteps and his grandfather's before that. But the weight of unpaid bills pressed heavier on his shoulders with each passing day. The foreclosure notice tucked beneath a magnet on his refrigerator served as a constant reminder that tradition meant nothing to bank executives in pressed suits who'd never felt soil beneath their fingernails. Marcus wiped the sweat from his brow as he knelt between the strawberry plants, his weathered hands moving with practiced efficiency as he selected only the ripest fruit. Each berry had to be perfect, not because he was particular, but because his small customer base at the local farmer's market demanded quality he could barely afford to provide. The irony wasn't lost on him that he grew some of the finest berries in the county, yet struggled to put decent meals on his own table. The sound of voices drifting over his fence caught his attention, causing him to pause in his harvesting. A couple walked along the gravel road that bordered his property, their conversation animated and filled with the kind of enthusiasm that suggested city dwellers discovering the countryside for the first time. The woman wore designer hiking boots that looked like they'd never seen a day of actual hiking, while the man carried a camera with a lens that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. "The terroir here is incredible," the woman was saying, her voice carrying a slight accent that Marcus couldn't quite place. "You can actually taste the difference in the soil composition." Marcus found himself smiling, despite his circumstances. He'd heard plenty of weekend visitors wax poetic about rural life, while secretly counting the minutes until they could return to their climate-controlled apartments and craft cocktail bars. Yet something about this couple's genuine appreciation struck him differently. The man stopped abruptly, pointing toward Marcus's strawberry patch. "Isabella, look at those berries. I've never seen such vibrant color." The woman, Isabella apparently, followed his gaze and gasped softly. "The way the light hits them, it's like they're glowing from within." Marcus stood slowly, his knees protesting the movement after hours of crouching. He'd been so focused on their conversation that he'd forgotten he was visible from the road. The couple noticed him immediately, and instead of the embarrassed wave and quick departure he expected, they approached the fence with genuine curiosity. "Good morning," Isabella called out, her smile warm and unguarded. "I hope you don't mind us admiring your farm. Those strawberries are absolutely stunning." "Not at all," Marcus replied, unconsciously straightening his worn flannel shirt. "Been growing berries here most of my life. These are just coming into their peak season." James, though Marcus didn't know his name yet, leaned against the fence post with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to being welcomed wherever he went. "What variety are you growing?" "The structure is perfect, and the color saturation is unlike anything I've seen in commercial operations." The question caught Marcus off guard. Most visitors ask basic questions about picking seasons or prices, but this man spoke with the vocabulary of someone who understood agriculture on a deeper level. "These are Halby and Eder-bearing strawberries, with some seascape mixed in for variety. The soil here has just the right pH balance, lots of organic matter from generations of careful composting." Isabella's eyes lit up with the kind of excitement Marcus usually reserved for discovering a particularly productive new plant variety. "The complexity must be extraordinary. I can imagine the layers of flavor, the way the sweetness would balance against just a hint of tartness." You sound like you know food, Marcus observed, curiosity overcoming his natural reserve around strangers. You could say that, James replied with a modest smile that suggested considerable understatement. Marcus found himself studying the couple more carefully. Their clothes spoke of money, but not the ostentatious kind that some wealthy visitors flaunted. Instead, they carried themselves with the quiet confidence of people who'd earned their success through skill rather than inheritance. Isabella's hands, he noticed, bore the small scars and calluses that came from years of kitchen work, while James had the posture of someone accustomed to standing for long hours. "Where are you folks from?" Marcus asked, genuine interest replacing his initial wariness. "We're based in San Francisco mostly, but we travel quite a bit for work," Isabella explained. "We're actually scouting this region for a new project." The conversation might have continued, but Marcus noticed the couple glancing repeatedly at his strawberries, with the kind of longing usually reserved for unattainable luxuries. An idea formed in his mind, born partly from old-fashioned hospitality and partly from the recognition that these people would truly appreciate what he'd spent decades perfecting. "Would you like to try some?" Marcus asked, already moving toward his harvest basket before they could answer. "Oh, we couldn't," James protested, though his eyes followed Marcus's movements hopefully. "You're running a business here. Business is about relationships," Marcus replied, selecting a handful of the most perfect berries he'd picked that morning. "And you two seem like the type who'd understand what makes these special." He walked to the fence and extended his hand, offering berries that still carried the morning's dew. Isabella accepted them with the reverence of someone receiving a sacred gift, while James examined his portion with the intensity of a jeweler appraising diamonds. "The aroma alone," Isabella murmured, closing her eyes as she brought the berry to her nose. "It's like concentrated sunshine with notes of vanilla and just a whisper of floral essence." Marcus watched as they tasted his berries, their expressions shifting through surprise, delight, and something approaching revelation. These weren't polite compliments from people being kind to a local farmer. This was genuine appreciation from individuals who understood quality on a level that most people never reached. "This is extraordinary," James said finally, his voice carrying the weight of professional judgment. "The flavor profile is more complex than berries I've sourced from premium suppliers at 10 times what these would cost. The texture is perfect too," Isabella added, taking another bite with obvious pleasure. "Firm enough to hold its shape, but yielding just enough to release all those incredible flavors." Marcus felt a flush of pride that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with recognition. For too long, his berries had been treated as mere commodities, priced by the pound rather than valued for their unique qualities. These strangers understood what he'd been trying to achieve through decades of careful cultivation. "Take some with you," Marcus said impulsively, moving toward his storage shed where empty baskets waited. "I insist." "We really couldn't," Isabella protested, though she was already following him with her eyes. "Consider it an investment in word-of-mouth advertising," Marcus replied with a grin. "If you're in the food business, maybe you'll remember this place next time you need quality fruit." He selected a medium-sized basket and began filling it with berries, choosing each one with the same care he'd use for his most demanding customers. The morning light caught the deep red of the strawberries, highlighting their natural glossiness and perfect heart shapes. "At least let us pay you," James insisted, reaching for his wallet. Marcus waved the offer away with a gesture that brooked no argument. Hospitality isn't hospitality if there's a price tag attached. Besides, you folks seem like you'd put these to good use. Isabella accepted the basket with hands that trembled slightly, though whether from emotion or excitement, Marcus couldn't tell. "This is incredibly generous." "Thank you, doesn't seem adequate." "Just enjoy them," Marcus replied simply. "That's payment enough for me." The couple exchanged a look that carried some deeper meaning, the kind of wordless communication that came from years of partnership in both business and life. James pulled out a business card and hesitated for a moment before extending it toward Marcus. "If you don't mind," James said carefully, "we'd like to stay in touch. What you're doing here, it's special." Marcus accepted the card without looking at it, tucking it into his shirt pocket while maintaining eye contact with his visitors. "You're welcome back any time. The berry season runs through October. and I'm usually here from sunrise to sunset." "We'll definitely take you up on that," Isabella said, cradling the basket against her chest like precious cargo. "And Marcus, if you ever consider expanding your operation or looking for new markets, please give us a call." After the couple departed, walking back down the gravel road with frequent glances over their shoulders at his farm, Marcus returned to his harvesting with renewed energy. Their appreciation had reminded him why he'd fallen in love with farming in the first place. It wasn't about the money, though he desperately needed that. It was about creating something beautiful and nourishing with his own hands, about carrying forward traditions that connected him to the land and to generations of farmers who'd worked this same soil. That evening, as Marcus sat on his front porch with a glass of sweet tea and watched the sunset paint his fields in shades of gold and amber, he finally remembered the business card in his pocket. He pulled it out, expecting to see the name of a small catering company or perhaps a local restaurant. Instead, he found himself staring at elegant lettering that read, "Isabella Rodriguez, executive chef," followed by the name of a restaurant he'd seen featured in magazines at the grocery store checkout. His hands shook as he turned the card over, finding James's information on the reverse side. James Chen, culinary director, with the same restaurant name and a San Francisco address that Marcus recognized from food documentaries he'd watched during sleepless nights when worries about the farm kept him awake. These weren't just food enthusiasts who'd happened upon his farm. These were celebrities in the culinary world. Names that appeared on television shows and bestseller lists. People whose opinions could make or break restaurants and food suppliers across the country. And he'd given them a basket of berries like they were neighbors stopping by for a chat. The implications hit him in waves. First came embarrassment that he'd been so casual with people of their stature, followed quickly by amazement that such successful individuals had been so genuinely kind and down to earth. But underneath both emotions ran a current of possibility that he barely dared to acknowledge. Over the following weeks, Marcus found himself thinking about Isabella and James more frequently than he cared to admit. He wondered if they'd actually eaten the berries, or if the fruit had ended up forgotten in a hotel refrigerator. He questioned whether their interest had been genuine or merely polite acknowledgement of his generosity. Most of all, he wrestled with the decision of whether to contact them, knowing that reaching out might shatter the pleasant memory of their encounter. The farm's financial situation continued to deteriorate despite his best efforts. The local farmers' market provided barely enough income to cover basic expenses, leaving nothing for equipment repairs or the loan payments that arrived with depressing regularity. Marcus had already sold his father's vintage tractor and most of the farm equipment that wasn't absolutely essential for berry production. The house itself needed a new roof, but that expense would have to wait until he figured out how to keep the land from being seized by the bank. His thoughts were interrupted one morning by the sound of an expensive car engine purring up his gravel driveway. Marcus looked up from repairing an irrigation line to see the same sleek sedan that had brought Isabella and James on their first visit. His heart began pounding as he recognized both figures emerging from the vehicle, though they were dressed more formally this time, carrying leather portfolios that suggested serious business. "Marcus," Isabella called out, her voice carrying the same warmth he remembered, though there was an undercurrent of excitement that made him nervous. "I hope you don't mind us dropping by again." "Of course not," Marcus replied, wiping his hands on his work clothes and walking toward them with forced casualness. "Good to see you both. How did those berries turn out?" "They were incredible," James answered immediately, his professional demeanor unable to completely mask his enthusiasm. "Actually, that's exactly why we're here." Isabella opened her portfolio and withdrew a thick document bound in expensive-looking covers. "We have a proposition for you, Marcus. Something we think could benefit all of us significantly." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. In his experience, propositions from wealthy city people rarely worked out well for rural farmers, especially when they involve legal documents and formal presentations. "What kind of proposition?" "We're opening a new restaurant," James explained, his words measured and careful. "Not just another restaurant, but a flagship location that will showcase the absolute finest ingredients from small, sustainable farms like yours. The entire concept revolves around partnerships with exceptional producers," Isabella continued, her eyes bright with the kind of vision that came from years of planning. "We want to tell the stories of the farmers who make extraordinary food possible, and we want your berries to be the centerpiece of that story." Marcus blinked several times, certain he'd misunderstood. "You want my berries in your restaurant?" "More than that," James clarified, opening his own portfolio to reveal architectural drawings and business plans. "We want to offer you an exclusive partnership that would provide guaranteed income, marketing support, and the resources to expand your operation significantly." The world seemed to slow down around Marcus as he processed what they were telling him. These weren't just successful chefs making a casual inquiry about purchasing fruit. They were offering him a lifeline at exactly the moment when he'd been preparing to lose everything his family had built over 3 generations. "I don't understand," Marcus said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You tasted a few berries. How does that translate into what you're describing?" Isabella's expression softened as she recognized the overwhelming nature of what they were proposing. "Those weren't just good berries, Marcus. They were exceptional in ways that most people in our industry spend their entire careers searching for. The flavor complexity, the perfect balance of sweetness and acidity, the way they maintain their integrity even hours after picking, it's exactly what we've been trying to find for years." James nodded enthusiastically. "We've built our reputation on discovering unique suppliers and creating mutually beneficial partnerships. When we encounter something truly special, we don't just place orders. We invest in long-term relationships that help everyone succeed." Marcus sank onto an overturned crate, his legs suddenly unsteady as the magnitude of their offer began to register. "What exactly are you proposing?" Isabella opened the bound document and began explaining terms that seemed too good to be true. A 5-year exclusive contract with guaranteed minimum purchases that would more than triple your current income. Premium pricing that reflects the true value of what you're producing. Financial support for expanding your growing operation, including new equipment, additional plantings, and infrastructure improvements. Plus marketing partnership that would make your farm part of our brand identity, James added. "Your berries wouldn't just be ingredients. They'd be featured prominently in our promotional materials, our television appearances, and the cookbook we're planning." The numbers Isabella mentioned made Marcus's head spin. The guaranteed minimum orders alone would solve his immediate financial crisis and provide the kind of security he hadn't experienced since his father was alive. The expansion support would allow him to realize dreams he'd abandoned years ago as impractical fantasies. "But why me?" Marcus asked, voicing the question that had been building since they'd started their presentation. "There are bigger operations, more established farms, with proven track records. I'm barely keeping this place running." Isabella and James exchanged one of their meaningful looks before Isabella answered with obvious sincerity. "Because size isn't what matters in what we do. Quality matters. Passion matters. The connection between the farmer and the land that comes through in every berry you grow, that's what makes dining memorable. We've worked with large commercial suppliers," James added, his tone becoming more serious. "The fruit is consistent and affordable, but it lacks the character that transforms a meal from mere consumption into an experience. What you're producing here has soul." Marcus found himself thinking about his grandfather, who'd started the farm with nothing but determination and an unwavering belief that good food required patience and respect for the natural growing process. His father had expanded the operation modestly, always prioritizing quality over quantity, always maintaining the personal touch that made their produce special among those who knew where to look. "I'd need to upgrade everything," Marcus said slowly, his mind already working through the massive logistics of scaling up his operation. "More plants, better irrigation systems, expanded storage facilities, probably additional land. All covered in the partnership agreement," Isabella assured him, gesturing toward the thick contract. "We're not just buying berries, Marcus. We're investing in a vision that requires your success to achieve our own goals." The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours as they walked through his fields together, Isabella and James asking detailed questions about his growing methods, seasonal variations, soil management techniques, and production capacity. Their questions revealed a depth of agricultural knowledge that impressed Marcus and demonstrated that they understood the complexities of what they were proposing. "How do you maintain such consistent quality without chemical interventions?" James asked as they examined a particularly productive section of plants. It starts with the soil, Marcus explained, kneeling down to scoop up a handful of rich dark earth. My grandfather taught me that healthy soil produces healthy plants, and healthy plants produce the best fruit. We've been building organic matter in these fields for 70 years, composting everything, rotating crops when necessary, never pushing for yields that would exhaust the land. And Isabella photographed everything with the focused attention of someone documenting precious discoveries. The sustainable practices aren't just environmentally responsible, they're producing superior results. That's exactly the story we want to share with our customers. By the time they reached the farmhouse porch, Marcus had moved from shocked disbelief to cautious optimism. The contract terms were more generous than anything he'd dared imagine, but more importantly, Isabella and James treated him as an equal partner rather than a supplier to be managed and directed. I need time to review this properly, Marcus said, hefting the substantial contract documents. And I should probably have a lawyer who understands agricultural agreements take a look. Absolutely, James replied immediately, his response revealing that he'd expected and respected such caution. Take all the time you need. We're committed to making this work for everyone involved, which means making sure you're completely comfortable with every aspect of the partnership. Isabella pulled out her phone and showed Marcus several professional photographs she'd apparently taken during their previous visit, images he hadn't realized were being captured. I hope you don't mind, but I documented some of your berries for our development team. The visual presentation will be crucial for the restaurant concept and marketing materials. The photographs were stunning, transforming his familiar strawberries into something that looked more like precious gems than agricultural products. The lighting and composition elevated everyday fruit into the realm of art, showcasing qualities that Marcus had always known were there but had never seen presented so dramatically. These are incredible, Marcus said honestly, examining each image with growing amazement. You have a real talent for this. Food photography has become essential in our industry, Isabella explained with obvious pride in her work. But honestly, your berries made it easy. They're naturally photogenic because they're naturally exceptional. As the afternoon progressed into evening, Marcus found himself sharing stories about the farm's history, his family's deep connection to the land, and his dreams for what the operation could become with proper resources and financial stability. Isabella and James listened with genuine interest, asking follow-up questions that showed they were absorbing details rather than merely being polite. There's one additional element we'd like to discuss, James said as they prepared to leave, his tone becoming slightly more formal. We'd like to feature you personally in some of our marketing materials. Nothing invasive or overly commercial. But the story of a third-generation farmer producing extraordinary fruit is exactly the kind of authentic narrative that resonates with our target customers. End quote. The idea of appearing in advertisements or promotional materials made Marcus distinctly uncomfortable. But he could see the logical connection between their marketing strategy and the personal stories that gave products meaning beyond mere consumption. People wanted to know where their food came from, and his genuine story was something that marketing departments couldn't manufacture or replicate. Let me think about that aspect as well, Marcus replied diplomatically, not wanting to reject anything outright while still protecting his privacy. Of course, Isabella said, shaking his hand with surprising firmness for such a small woman. We'll be staying in the area for several more days if you have additional questions or want to discuss any concerns that come up during your review. After they departed, leaving him alone with the contract and a head full of possibilities he'd never dared imagine, Marcus sat on his porch with the thick documents spread across a folding card table, trying to make sense of legal language that seemed designed to obscure rather than clarify important details. The financial terms were clear enough, and they were even better than Isabella had initially described. The exclusivity clause worried him slightly, but the minimum purchase guarantees provided security that far outweighed the risk of potentially losing other customers. That evening, Marcus called his neighbor Harold, a retired lawyer who'd handled agricultural contracts for 4 decades, before moving to the countryside to raise cattle and enjoy a quieter pace of life. Harold agreed to review the documents, though he warned Marcus that entertainment industry contracts often contained complexities that even experienced agricultural lawyers might overlook. These restaurant people, Harold said over the phone, his voice carrying the caution that came from years of legal practice. They're not necessarily bad, but they operate in a world where image and publicity matter as much as the actual product. Make sure you understand exactly what you're agreeing to beyond just selling berries. The warning proved prescient when Harold called back 3 days later with a detailed analysis of the contract terms that revealed layers of complexity Marcus hadn't initially recognized. Most of the agreement was straightforward and favorable to Marcus, but several clauses granted Isabella and James's restaurant group broad rights to use his image, his farm story, and even aspects of his family history in their marketing efforts. It's not necessarily problematic, Harold explained during their meeting in Marcus's kitchen, surrounded by contract pages and legal notepads. But you need to understand that you're not just selling fruit. You're selling your story, your image, and potentially some aspects of your privacy. Marcus had been so focused on the financial salvation the contract represented that he hadn't fully considered the personal implications of becoming the public face of a marketing campaign. The idea of his photograph appearing in magazines or his voice being used in television commercials felt surreal and more than slightly uncomfortable. "What would you do in my position?" Marcus asked his neighbor directly, wanting honest advice from someone who understood both the legal and practical implications. Harold was quiet for a long moment, stirring sugar into his coffee with the deliberate care of someone weighing complex considerations. 30 years ago, I'd have told you to be much more cautious about any agreement that involved your personal story. But times have changed dramatically, and opportunities like this don't come along often for small farmers. The real question is whether you trust these people to treat you fairly over the long term." End quote. That trust, Marcus realized, was the crucial element he'd been wrestling with since Isabella and James had first approached his fence line with their appreciation and enthusiasm. Their behavior during both visits had been consistently respectful and professional, but the food industry was notorious for chewing up small suppliers and discarding them when more convenient or profitable options appeared. Marcus spent the following days conducting thorough research about Isabella Rodriguez and James Chen, using his neighbor's internet connection to explore their professional backgrounds, public statements, and business practices. What he discovered was reassuring and aligned with the impressions they'd made during their personal interactions. Both chefs had built their reputations specifically on supporting small farmers and promoting sustainable agriculture practices. More importantly, Marcus found interviews and articles where both chefs spoke passionately about the importance of preserving traditional farming methods and supporting family operations against the overwhelming pressure of industrial agricultural consolidation. Their commitment seemed genuine and deeply rooted in values that aligned closely with his own beliefs about farming and food production. The turning point in his decision-making process came when Marcus discovered a documentary featuring Isabella's extensive work with heritage seed preservation and James's efforts to connect urban consumers directly with rural producers through educational programs and direct marketing initiatives. Their dedication appeared authentic and consistent over time, rooted in principles rather than mere marketing positioning or temporary business strategies. On a Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after Isabella and James had presented their partnership proposal, Marcus called the number on James's business card, his hands slightly trembling as he waited for the bell. "Connection," the chef answered personally, his voice immediately warming with recognition when Marcus identified himself. "I've reviewed the contract thoroughly with a qualified lawyer," Marcus said without preamble, having decided that directness was the best approach. "I'd like to discuss a few specific modifications, but I'm genuinely interested in moving forward with the partnership." The enthusiasm in James's response was immediate and infectious, clearly genuine rather than merely professional. "That's fantastic news, Marcus. Isabella will be absolutely thrilled when I tell her. What modifications are you thinking about?" The negotiations that followed took place over several phone calls during the next 2 days, conducted with remarkable efficiency and mutual respect that reinforced Marcus's growing confidence in his decision. Marcus requested clearer boundaries around the use of his personal story and family history in marketing materials, while Isabella and James asked for slightly broader rights to photograph his farming processes for educational and promotional purposes. Both sides compromised willingly and thoughtfully, arriving at terms that addressed everyone's primary concerns while maintaining the partnership's essential structure. "There's one final element we'd like to arrange," Isabella said during their concluding negotiation call, her voice carrying obvious excitement about moving forward. "We'd like to visit again next week with a small development team to document your farming methods and conduct a brief interview about your techniques and philosophy." "What exactly would that involve?" Marcus asked, still somewhat wary of being transformed into a marketing spectacle despite his growing trust in their intentions. "Nothing dramatic or artificial," James assured him quickly, clearly understanding his concerns. "Maybe an hour of natural conversation about how you produce such exceptional berries, some footage of you working normally in the fields, perhaps a few scenic shots of the farm itself. Everything very authentic and, quote, true to who you are." Marcus agreed to the filming session, partly because the modified contract required some level of cooperation with their promotional efforts, but mostly because Isabella and James had consistently earned his trust through their transparent approach to business and their genuine respect for his concerns and expertise. The filming session the following Tuesday proved far less intrusive than Marcus had feared it might be. The production team consisted of just 3 people: a skilled cameraman who worked unobtrusively, a sound engineer who captured ambient farm sounds along with conversation, and a thoughtful producer who asked intelligent questions about Marcus's growing methods and, agricultural philosophy. Isabella and James were present throughout but remained tactfully in the background, occasionally suggesting additional topics for discussion, but never pushing Marcus beyond his natural comfort zone or asking him to be anyone other than himself. "Tell us about the soil management techniques you use," the producer prompted as cameras rolled discreetly. "What makes this particular location so special for growing exceptional berries?" Marcus found himself relaxing quickly as he discussed topics he was genuinely passionate about and knowledgeable concerning. "My grandfather always said that successful farming starts underground, and experience has proven him absolutely right. This soil has been building organic matter steadily for 3 full generations. We've never used chemical fertilizers or synthetic interventions, never pushed for yields that would exhaust the land's natural fertility." "How do you determine when berries have reached perfect ripeness?" Isabella interjected from her position behind the camera, her question clearly coming from professional curiosity. "Experience mostly, though there are specific indicators," Marcus replied, selecting a berry from a nearby plant and holding it up to demonstrate. "Color is important, certainly, but it's really about firmness and the way the fruit separates cleanly from the stem. These berries will communicate their readiness if you know how to interpret their signals." The filming session wrapped up efficiently in less than 2 hours, and Marcus was genuinely surprised to discover that he'd actually enjoyed the process of articulating his methods and philosophy. Talking about his farming techniques forced him to organize knowledge that had become instinctive over decades, helping him understand and appreciate his own expertise in new ways. 3 months later, Marcus stood in his significantly expanded fields watching contractors install a sophisticated new irrigation system funded entirely by the restaurant partnership. His berry production had already increased by more than 50%, and detailed plans were in place for additional plantings that would triple his total capacity within 18 months. The transformation extended far beyond mere infrastructure improvements and increased production capacity. The guaranteed income from Isabella and James's restaurant group had allowed Marcus to quit his part-time weekend job at the local hardware store and focus his energy entirely on farming for the first time in years. For the first time since his father's death, he could afford to experiment with new berry varieties and implement sustainable practices that required significant upfront investment but would improve long-term productivity and soil health. The marketing campaign featuring his farm and his story launched in early September, perfectly timed to coincide with the grand opening of Isabella and James's flagship restaurant in San Francisco's Mission District. Marcus had agreed to attend the opening event, despite his considerable reservations about navigating a social and professional world so dramatically different from his rural existence. The restaurant, named Terroir, in recognition of the connection between land and flavor, occupied a beautifully converted warehouse space. Its industrial architecture softened by living walls of herbs and vegetables that customers could observe from multiple vantage points throughout the dining room. Marcus's strawberries were featured prominently on the opening menu, incorporated into both innovative desserts and surprising savory dishes that showcased their complex flavor profile in ways he'd never imagined possible. "Welcome to our dream made tangible," Isabella said during her opening night speech to the assembled crowd of food critics, industry professionals, and influential customers, gesturing toward Marcus, who stood somewhat uncomfortably near the kitchen entrance in his best suit. "This restaurant exists because of partnerships with extraordinary producers like Marcus Henderson, whose berries represent everything we believe about the essential connection between land, farmer, and table." The sustained applause that followed felt completely surreal to Marcus, but he was genuinely moved by the authentic appreciation he saw in the faces surrounding him. These weren't just wealthy diners consuming an expensive meal for social status. They were serious food enthusiasts who understood and valued the complex story behind what they were experiencing. Over the months that followed the restaurant's successful opening, Marcus received regular updates about terroir's growing acclaim and his berries' prominent role in that success. Food critics consistently praised the exceptional quality of ingredients, with several specifically mentioning the strawberries in glowing reviews. Marcus's farm was featured in prestigious food magazines and television segments about sustainable agriculture and the farm-to-table movement. The increased visibility brought unexpected benefits that extended well beyond the original restaurant contract. Other high-end establishments began contacting Marcus directly, hoping to purchase berries for their own menus. While his exclusive agreement with Isabella and James limited his ability to supply restaurants directly, he could sell excess production to specialty markets and gourmet retailers who were eager to associate themselves with his growing reputation. More importantly, from Marcus's perspective, the partnership had validated his lifelong approach to farming in ways that transcended mere financial success. Agricultural extension agents began visiting his farm regularly to study and document his methods. University researchers asked permission to analyze his soil management techniques for academic papers. Young farmers from across the region sought his advice about transitioning to sustainable practices that prioritized quality over quantity. By the end of his first full year in partnership with Isabella and James, Marcus had not only saved his family farm from foreclosure, but transformed it into a recognized model of sustainable agriculture that supported his family financially while contributing meaningfully to a broader movement toward ethical food production and environmental stewardship. The strawberries that had once been sold anonymously by the basket at local farmers markets were now featured prominently in one of the country's most acclaimed restaurants. Their story shared with thousands of diners who gained new appreciation for the skill, dedication, and patience required to produce truly exceptional food. The spring morning when Isabella and James had made their first surprise visit felt simultaneously like yesterday and like a lifetime ago, though barely 20 months had actually passed. Marcus still began each day exactly the same way, walking through his berry fields with the rising sun, carefully checking plants and thoughtfully assessing the day's harvest potential. But now those familiar walks carried the deep satisfaction of knowing that his work mattered beyond his own survival, that the berries he grew with such meticulous care would bring genuine pleasure to people who understood and valued their exceptional quality. Standing in his substantially expanded fields one morning, watching newly planted berry varieties establish themselves in soil enriched by generations of careful stewardship, Marcus reflected on the improbable journey that had brought him from the brink of losing everything to a level of success and recognition he'd never dared imagine. A simple act of sharing, motivated by nothing more than basic human kindness and old-fashioned hospitality, had opened doors that seemed impossible when he'd been struggling just to pay basic bills and keep his tamale land. The partnership with Isabella and James had evolved far beyond a straightforward supplier relationship into something approaching genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared values. They visited the farm regularly, not just for business purposes, but because they genuinely enjoyed Marcus's company and respected his expertise. Their remarkable success had become inextricably intertwined with his own, creating the kind of mutually beneficial relationship that business schools taught as theoretical ideals, but which rarely existed in actual practice. As Marcus prepared for another promising harvest season, He felt the quiet satisfaction that came from work well done, and recognition earned through dedication and integrity, rather than luck or manipulation. His berries would once again grace the tables of discerning diners in the country's finest restaurants, carrying with them the authentic story of a struggling farmer who had chosen generosity over suspicion, trust over fear, and genuine partnership over isolated self-protection. The lasting legacy of that choice extended far beyond financial success to encompass a renewed sense of purpose and deeper connection to the land that had sustained his family for 3 generations and would hopefully continue to do so for many more. In sharing his finest berries with 2 appreciative strangers on a quiet country road, Marcus had discovered that the most valuable harvest often came not from the fields themselves, but from the meaningful relationships cultivated through genuine human kindness, mutual respect, and the courage to trust in possibilities that seemed too good to be true. The second year of the partnership brought even greater expansion and recognition. Isabella and James had opened 2 additional restaurant locations, both featuring Marcus's berries as signature ingredients. The demand had grown so substantially that Marcus hired his first full-time employees, 2 young farmers fresh from agricultural college, who were eager to learn his sustainable growing methods. Teaching them the techniques his grandfather had passed down to him filled Marcus with unexpected joy, knowing that these traditional methods would continue even beyond his own tenure on the land. The key to understanding plants, Marcus explained to his new employees as they walked through the morning fields, is learning to see what they're trying to tell you. Every leaf, every stem, every piece of fruit is communicating something about the health of the soil, the adequacy of water, the balance of nutrients. Sarah, the younger of his 2 employees, knelt beside a strawberry plant with the focused attention of someone genuinely committed to mastering her craft. "How long did it take you to develop this kind of intuitive understanding?" "Honestly, I'm still learning every season," Marcus replied with characteristic humility. "My grandfather used to say that farming is a conversation between human beings and the natural world, and good conversations take a lifetime to perfect." The educational aspect of his work had become increasingly important to Marcus as his reputation grew within agricultural circles. University extension programs regularly brought groups of students to observe his methods, and he'd begun accepting speaking engagements at farming conferences across the region. The irony wasn't lost on him that the shy farmer who'd once avoided crowds was now considered an expert worth listening to by professionals throughout the industry. Isabella and James had also evolved in their approach to the partnership, incorporating Marcus more deeply into their menu development process and seasonal planning. They visited the farm monthly now, timing their trips to coincide with different stages of the growing cycle, so they could understand how various factors affected flavor development and harvest timing. "We're thinking about featuring your berries in a special tasting menu this spring," James explained during one of their visits, pulling out sketches and notes that showed the careful thought behind their culinary innovations. 7 courses, each highlighting a different aspect of the berry's flavor profile throughout the growing season. "Early season berries have that bright acidity that pairs beautifully with fresh herbs," Isabella added, photographing newly formed fruit with the artistic eye that had become her trademark. Mid-season varieties develop those complex sugar profiles that work so well with savory applications. Marcus found himself drawn into conversations about flavor development and seasonal variations that revealed depths he'd never fully articulated, even to himself. Working with chefs of Isabella and James's caliber had taught him to think about his berries, not just as agricultural products, but as ingredients capable of creating memorable experiences for people hundreds of miles away. The financial transformation of his operation had been remarkable, but the personal satisfaction came from different sources entirely. Letters arrived regularly from customers who'd eaten at Terroir and wanted to express their appreciation for the berry's exceptional quality. Food bloggers and magazine writers requested interviews about his farming philosophy. Most surprisingly, other farmers began seeking his advice about transitioning their own operations towards sustainable, quality-focused production. "The industrial agriculture model isn't working for small farmers," Marcus said during a presentation at the State Agricultural Conference, addressing an audience of several hundred farmers facing similar challenges to those he'd overcome. "But there are markets for exceptional quality products if you're willing to build relationships," and tell your story authentically. The questions that followed his presentation revealed how many farmers were struggling with the same issues that had nearly cost Marcus his land. Commodity pricing, corporate consolidation, and environmental regulations were squeezing family operations across the country. His partnership with Isabella and James represented more than just a successful business arrangement. It demonstrated a viable alternative to the conventional agricultural marketplace. "How do you find customers who appreciate quality over price?" asked a corn farmer from the northern part of the state, his weathered face showing the stress that Marcus recognized from his own recent past. "Start with the food community in your region," Marcus replied, drawing on lessons learned through experience rather than business school theory. Chefs, restaurant owners, specialty food stores, farmers market customers who ask detailed questions about your growing methods. Build relationships with people who understand the difference between good food and e-trade. Cheap food. The third year brought challenges that tested the partnership in ways none of them had anticipated. A late spring frost damaged nearly 30% of Marcus's crop, forcing difficult decisions about how to allocate limited supplies among competing demands. Isabella and James could have easily found alternative suppliers to fill their immediate needs, but instead they worked with Marcus to adjust their menu planning and preserve the exclusivity that had made the partnership valuable for everyone involved. "We're in this together for the long term," Isabella assured Marcus during an emergency meeting following the frost damage assessment. "Short-term disruptions are part of agriculture, and our success depends on supporting each other through difficult seasons as well as abundant ones." The response to the crisis strengthened Marcus's confidence in the partnership while demonstrating the kind of mutual loyalty that sustained successful business relationships over time. Rather than seeking quick solutions that might compromise future collaboration, they developed strategies that protected everyone's interests while maintaining the quality standards that had made their partnership distinctive. James proposed reducing portion sizes rather than substituting inferior berries, a decision that actually enhanced the perceived value of Marcus's fruit by creating an aura of scarcity and exclusivity. Isabella developed new menu items that used Marcus's berries more sparingly, but showcased them more prominently, turning the supply challenge into a marketing advantage. The frost crisis also led to Marcus's most significant expansion yet. Using insurance proceeds and additional investment from Isabella and James's restaurant group, he purchased an adjacent 40-acre parcel that had come up for sale unexpectedly. The additional land would allow him to diversify his plantings, experiment with new varieties, and create buffer capacity for future weather-related challenges. "This gives us room to really explore what's possible," Marcus explained to his employees as they walked the boundaries of the new property, envisioning how it would integrate with their existing operations. Different soil types, varied elevation, microclimates that might support berry varieties we've never tried before. The expansion required hiring additional staff and investing in new equipment, but Marcus approached these challenges with confidence born from 3 years of successful partnership. The guaranteed income from Isabella and James's restaurants provided the financial stability necessary for long-term planning, while their collaborative approach to problem-solving had taught him to view obstacles as opportunities for innovation. By the beginning of the 4th year, Marcus's operation had transformed from a struggling family farm into a recognized leader in sustainable berry production. Agricultural magazines featured articles about his methods, university researchers cited his work in academic papers, and other specialty crop farmers visited regularly to observe his techniques firsthand. The personal transformation had been equally dramatic. The quiet farmer who'd once worried about making conversation with strangers now spoke confidently at industry conferences and participated actively in regional agricultural organizations. His expertise was sought by government agencies developing sustainable farming initiatives and private companies looking to improve their sourcing practices. "You've become something of a celebrity in agricultural circles," Harold observed during one of their regular coffee conversations, gesturing toward a stack of magazine articles featuring Marcus's farm. "Never thought I'd see the day when my neighbor would be quoted in the Wall Street Journal." Marcus laughed at the observation, though he remained somewhat amazed by the trajectory his life had taken. "I'm still just growing berries the way my grandfather taught me. It's the world around farming that's changed, not what I'm doing. Maybe that's exactly why what you're doing matters so much now," Harold replied thoughtfully. In a world of shortcuts and artificial everything, people are hungry for authentic quality. The 5th year of the partnership brought Marcus's greatest challenge and most significant triumph. Isabella and James approached him with a proposal that would expand their collaboration far beyond its original scope. They wanted to open a farm-to-table cooking school on Marcus's property, creating an educational destination that would teach both professional chefs and serious home cooks about the connection between farming practices and food quality. Imagine students spending a week learning to cook with ingredients they harvest themselves each morning, Isabella explained, her enthusiasm evident as she outlined the concept. They'd work alongside you in the fields, learning how soil management and timing affect flavor, then prepare meals that showcase what they've learned. The proposal required significant infrastructure development on Marcus's property, including a commercial kitchen, dining facilities, and overnight accommodations for students. The investment would be substantial, but so would the potential returns in terms of both revenue and educational impact. James presented detailed financial projections, showing how the cooking school could generate year-round income while supporting Marcus's core berry production business. The school would operate during your off-season primarily, so it wouldn't interfere with farming operations. And it would create a new revenue stream that doesn't depend entirely on crop yields. Marcus spent weeks considering the proposal, consulting with Harold about the legal implications, and discussing the concept with his employees, who would be involved in teaching students about sustainable farming practices. The idea excited him in ways he hadn't expected, offering opportunities to share his knowledge and passion with people who might carry those lessons to their own communities. "I think my grandfather would have loved this idea," Marcus finally told Isabella and James during a meeting in his farmhouse kitchen, the same room where he'd struggled to pay bills just 5 years earlier. He always believed that good farming was about more than producing food. It was about maintaining a connection to the land that industrial agriculture was destroying. The construction of the cooking school took most of the 6th year, during which Marcus continued expanding his berry production and refining the sustainable practices that had made his farm a model for others in the region. The school's first session opened the following spring with 12 students, including professional chefs from major cities and serious home cooks who'd competed for the limited spots. "Welcome to what we hope will be a transformative week," Marcus addressed the first group of students as they gathered in his newly completed teaching kitchen, sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked the berry fields where their education would begin each morning. "You're here to learn about the connection between farming and cooking, but more importantly, you're here to understand how the choices we make about food affect everything from soil health to community sustainability." The success of the cooking school exceeded everyone's expectations. Students left with not only improved culinary skills, but also deeper appreciation for the complexity and importance of sustainable agriculture. Many maintained contact with Marcus long after their visits, sending updates about how their experiences had influenced their approach to cooking and food sourcing. Food writers and television producers began featuring the school in articles and programs about culinary education and sustainable farming. The combination of Marcus's authentic expertise, Isabella and James's culinary reputation, and the school's unique hands-on approach created something genuinely distinctive in an increasingly crowded Dassin market for food-related experiences. "What you've created here is really special," said a food critic from a national magazine during a visit to document one of the school sessions. "It's not just education, it's transformation. People leave here with a completely different understanding of food and farming." 7 years after that first encounter at his fence line, Marcus stood in his expanded fields watching the sunrise paint his berry plants in shades of gold and green, reflecting on a journey that had exceeded his wildest dreams, while remaining true to the values his family had maintained for generations. The struggling farmer who'd shared berries with strangers had become a recognized leader in sustainable agriculture, a successful entrepreneur, and an influential educator whose impact extended far beyond his own property. The partnership with Isabella and James had evolved into something that none of them could have envisioned during those first conversations about exceptional berries and authentic farming. Their restaurants continued to thrive, featuring Marcus's fruit as signature ingredients that helped define their culinary identity. The cooking school had waiting lists extending months into the future, with graduates carrying Marcus's message about sustainable farming to communities across the country. Most importantly, the land that had nearly been lost to foreclosure was now more productive and sustainable than it had ever been, providing employment for a dozen people and serving as a demonstration site for farming practices that could help address some of agriculture's most pressing challenges. Marcus's two children, who'd shown little interest in farming during their high school years, had both returned after college to join the operation, bringing fresh perspectives and new energy to work that would continue long after Marcus himself retired. Standing in the morning light, surrounded by the results of 7 years of careful growth and thoughtful partnership, Marcus felt the deep satisfaction that came from work that mattered, relationships built on mutual respect, and the knowledge that a simple act of kindness had created something much larger than any of them had dared imagine. The berries growing around him would continue to bring pleasure to people throughout the country, but more importantly, they represented proof that traditional values and innovative thinking could work together to create sustainable success that benefited everyone involved. The story that had begun with a struggling farmer sharing berries with appreciative strangers had become something much more significant, demonstrating that authentic quality, genuine relationships, and mutual respect could triumph over the economic pressures that threatened family farming throughout the country. In choosing generosity over suspicion and partnership over isolation, Marcus had not only saved his own operation, but had helped create a model for the kind of agriculture that could sustain both the land and the communities that depended on it for generations to come.